why NAD is important in our bodies. It's really important. If it disappears, we're screwed, right?
Well, we'd be dead in 30 seconds. We need it for energy, but it was discovered about 100 years ago by Germans who were looking at extracts in yeast, and there was this component called NAD that was necessary for chemical reactions.
And we didn't say what that stands for.
So NAD stands for nicotinamide, which is vitamin B3, and adenine dinucleotide. This is a sugar and a phosphate. The important part about it is that our cells use NAD to transfer hydrogen atoms between proteins and even DNA. That is really important for life. And without it, we can't make chemical energy, which is in the form of ATP, which we'll talk about later because that's important for metformin. NAD is found in abundance. There's many grams of it in the body. It's probably, with the exception of ATP, the most abundant molecule we have in the body. It helps us make energy, but it also has this other function that's just as important that we worked on and co-discovered in the 2000s. It activates the sirtuins, and the sirtuins are these defensive enzymes that, like the Pentagon, send out the troops. The problem is, as we get older, we make less NAD, and we also destroy it more for reasons that we don't fully understand, but it leads to a decline in our ability to fight off aging and the diseases that it causes.
And this is because NAD is a sensor for adversity.
It is. If you exercise, it's known, and fast, it's known to raise NAD levels. But even if you exercise and have the healthiest diet, you're still going to have lower NAD levels by the time you're in the latter half of your life. So that's why these supplements are thought to help, because they'll boost up those older levels of NAD to where they were when you were young.
Okay, so let's talk about the first NAD booster, probably the most well-known. It's definitely the most well-studied of the NAD boosters and probably the most used. That's NR.
Which stands for nicotinamide riboside. So that's the vitamin B3 plus the sugar without the N part, which is a phosphate. We'll get to the phosphate. That's important later. It may make a difference. But NR has been taken over the counter or through websites since 2014, either solely, just as a capsule, or there's some companies that sell it in combination with other molecules.
And because it's been pretty well studied in humans, there's been plenty of human studies, at least in the short term, that show little to no side effects. This is a pretty safe molecule.
That's for sure. And we know that if you take it as a supplement, just swallow the pill, either 250 milligrams per day or a gram, there's no apparent negative side effects. And in fact, you will raise NAD levels in blood tests.
So I think this is an important distinction to make, though. Like, there's a difference between safe and effective, right? Just because we say something is safe doesn't mean it's going to work in it. And in fact, sometimes things that are the most safe aren't going to work at all. That's why they're so safe, is they don't have any effect. But we do know that NR is largely safe. Millions of people around the world take it. NR has been well studied in animals as well. And let's start with that because we actually know more about what NR does in the bodies of animals than we do in the bodies of humans.
Well, let's start with yeast. Go even further back.
Okay, yeah.
So that's where it was first discovered. NR was a newly discovered molecule back in the early 2000s. It's found a little bit in milk and other foodstuffs. And if it was fed to yeast, they lived longer by turning on the yeast sirtuin pathway.
Okay, how much longer were the yeast living?
Generally, yeast live about 30% longer when you give them these molecules, similar to caloric restriction. And that's what this was doing, mimicking caloric restriction, because both activate the sirtuins and give increased genome stability and epigenome stability that lengthens their life.
And those kinds of findings make you really interested because you're really interested in the sirtuin activation. And so you've been part of a group of scientists that have been looking at this.
Yeah, one of the first things that we discovered, we're talking 2002, 2003 in my lab, is that there's an NAD synthesis gene called PNC1. In our body, it's called NAMPT, and it gets activated by these mild stressors. In a yeast cell, it's low salt, it's low sugar, heat, and that turns on the synthesis of NAD, and we found that extended lifespan. And then a few years later, it was shown that you can mimic this effect with this NR.
How does NR turn into NAD?
So NR has to go through an intermediate molecule. Let's start with the mouth. You swallow your NR, it'll go into the gut. Some of it will be metabolized by the gut bacteria, but most of it will go into the bloodstream and then flow around and then get taken up into your muscle and to your brain and other cells that by transporters called ENTs. And there it's converted into NMN by what are called NRKs. And then you add the phosphate and you've got this thing NMN. What's NMN? Nicotinamide mononucleotide. And then the cell puts two of those together to make NAD.
And when we do this in laboratory animals, you mentioned in yeast, it extends life by 30%. What have we seen in mice, which are a little closer to you and I than your yeast is?
Yeah, it's going back a number of years ago. It was found that NR, when given to mice, extends their lifespan by about 9%, but it was given to them late in life at about 700 days, which is a pretty old mouse. This has been like a 70-year-old human, but it still worked. But there were also improvements in health. They had more mitochondria, which is the energy. They had more athleticism, less inflammation. And so that was the first real study that said, okay, maybe supplementing with these molecules like NR or NMN might have some long-term health benefits as well in humans.
Among the other health benefits that have been seen by researchers who have given NR to animals in the lab, enhanced oxidative metabolism. Let's talk about that.
So they burn more fat.
Yeah.
They get thinner. And that also means that they're burning more oxygen. And that's thought to be really good at staving off diabetes, type 2 diabetes, as well as improving lifespan.
Let's carry this now into the human studies, because what we don't have, for reasons that maybe are obvious, but I'm going to state anyway, which is that humans live a very long life, and it's really hard to put humans into a control group and a test group across a very long time, then control for every variable that's possible, is longitudinal studies that show increases in lifespan as a result of taking NR. But we do have studies that have sought to show similar health benefits to what we've seen in rodents.
Somewhat. I would say NR, there have been a few positive results, not a lot. Before we get to that, I think it's worth talking about why can't we just take vitamin B3, which is a precursor to NR. And you can, but it doesn't raise NAD levels anywhere near the level that NR does. And NR doesn't seem to be as effective as NMN. So the closer you get to NAD with your molecule, the better it seems. And that's probably because you need to bring in other components. So if you just take vitamin B3, you need a sugar and the phosphate. If you just take NR, you need the phosphate. And phosphate is pretty rare in the body. It's in your bones, it's in your DNA. And maybe when you take NR, one of the issues is that you need to find the phosphate to add on there before it becomes active.
Okay, back to the human studies on NR.